about getting stronger or staying strong. So everyone can see my screen. Just give me a thumbs up if you can see it. All right, perfect. We're talking about strength. So the first thing about strength is to define exactly what you mean by it, right? Because strength is not just as straightforward as you would think until you start analyzing in your head. So we've got multiple categories of strength. So the first one is speed strength. What that means really is just how fast you can move a weight that is heavy. So for example, a good example of that is like your snatch. You got to move that barbell pretty fast to get underneath it. It's completely different to like a 1 rep max deadlift where you're lifting up the heavy bar off the floor, and it's significantly slower than like a 1 rep max snatch. Once the barbell goes below a certain speed, you're not going to be able to snatch it overhead. So that's how you would kind of frame that for yourself, speed strength. If you flip the script to strength speed, that's how fast you can move a moderately heavy weight over a consistent period of time. So as a CrossFitter, a good way to think about that would be like a Grace. You have a 135, you have to keep moving it over a certain duration. And that's just a definition of that. So we're doing 30 reps, clean and jerk. It'll be slower than your speed strength, but you're still maintaining as fast a velocity as you can sustain at that particular weight. So putting that into perspective, the third one would be strength endurance. And that's kind of like a chipper style CrossFit WOD. How much strength can you sustain over a long period of time? So as you keep going and chipping away, if you don't have the strength endurance, you'll get progressively slower, and that bleeds off into your WOD times. Power is kind of like a happy medium between speed strength and strength speed, and an easy way to say it is the rate of force development. How fast can you move the heaviest possible weight that you got, and how quickly can you get to that top speed? So that would be your expression of power. Powerlifting, where we do 1 rep maxes, isn't really a power sport. It's kind of a misnomer because you're not really looking for that maximal speed with that weight. You're just looking to move that weight, which will lead into maximal strength. That is, how much weight can you move with your body? A bench press, a squat, a deadlift, overhead press, a weighted pull-up. Those are all examples of your maximal strength. And that's kind of what I'll be focusing on this talk. The other three components are kind of out of the scope for the time that I have. So talking about maintaining your maximal strength, your 1 rep maxes, and trying to stay as close to that as possible. I just want to touch on absolute strength. Absolute strength is how much strength your body can express under extreme circumstances. So the story that everybody hears about a mom picking up a kid off a car or anything like that in extreme situations, it's like the maximal potential for strength that your body can express, and you don't usually have access to that when you do any kind of lifting or 1 rep max or what have you. You can get a kind of understanding of what that's like when you measure your 1 rep max doing by yourself versus 1 rep max when you have an audience or a competition and the adrenaline's running, and that's kind of taking you a little bit closer to your absolute strength. But again, for the sake of this, absolute strength doesn't really matter because it's something we can't usually tap into or use. So everybody's at home, everybody's stuck here. We're worried about the quarantine and we don't have heavy weights to lift. What's happening to your strength? The good news about strength is that because a lot of components about strength get covered in your training, how much muscle you recruit, how good you are at the technique that you're trying to express strength in, all that kind of stuff stays with you for a long period of time. What you need to worry about is loss of muscle mass and detraining, just not doing anything. So being that you're at home and you're still moving and still doing stuff, strength loss is not that much of a worry as long as you take a few simple steps to maintain it. The other thing is that as you build strength and muscle mass, and your body builds up more muscle fibers and more muscle cells, it creates myonuclei, which are like the control units for the muscle. So even if your muscle shrinks as you're sitting at home and you're not lifting as much or doing as much, those myonuclei stick around for a really long period of time. So the moment you pick up a heavy weight again, you don't need to rebuild everything from scratch. It's already there and it'll come back really quickly when you start training heavy again. And finally, there is some science that shows that from this detraining period, when you go back into it, the added adaptation response from your body might take you to a level that was beyond where you stopped training at. So even though you're at home not doing much, and let's say hypothetically we're here for 6 months, it's not the end of the world, because when you approach your training correctly back in the gym, you potentially will be beyond where you left off, provided you're doing your part now and not just sitting in front of Netflix. So your part, what is it you can do? So let's talk about the elements of strength. Motor unit recruitment. That comes back to like when I was talking about absolute strength. Your nerves can only activate a certain percentage of the muscle that you have. The more you train, the more of that muscle you can use. So what you want to do is, while you're at home, is still keep those pathways alive so that you can recruit a greater percentage of your muscle. So that's what I mean by motor recruitment. And we'll get into that in a minute. The skill part, a big part of strength is skill. If you can't squat well in an air squat, then your barbell squat's never going to be as good as you want it to be. So simple things like focusing on how to maintain or improve the fundamental skills behind the movements that you want to keep, your snatch, your clean, your squat, and so on and so forth, is something that you can do at home without any weight, just by sticking to perfecting the movement. And that kind of bleeds into the next point, which is your mobility. If your skill is limited by mobility, that's low-hanging fruit. You have the time at home to sit and take the time to improve the mobility that you need to perform the skill. And when you can perform the skill better, automatically your strength goes up or improves. Muscle mass is just how much muscle you have on your body. And I'll talk again about how to keep that, even though we don't have the weights to push around in the same way. A big component of strength is your tendons and ligaments, and it's often overlooked. A good example to touch on this is if you look at people who take steroids. When they take steroids and start lifting really heavy, really fast, the muscles develop at a very fast rate, but the joints and the tendons can't keep up and they usually get injured. While you're at home, you can train the joints, tendons, and ligaments to maintain their strength and their structure, and even thicken without much requirement for weight. And that's something that will serve you in the long run, because it'll reduce your injury rate and also in terms of the expression of your strength. So an easy way to keep your muscle mass high is protein, protein, protein. While you're at home, eat more protein. Eat more protein more often. There's a window of time by which the nutritional protein that you ate is no longer available, because you're not lifting as much and your body thinks it doesn't need the muscle anymore. It's going to use that protein as soon as it gets a chance to. So the way you avoid that is making sure that the body always has protein readily available from a nutritional source, rather than having to default into muscles and you start losing that mass. So eat more protein and eat protein more often. Another way is bedtime. If you use something like a slow release protein like casein, as you sleep, that's a long window of time where you're not able to maintain the protein that your body needs. And that's the time that your body will start using up your muscles. So by eating a slow release protein at bedtime, you're negating that effect and staying on top of it. And finally, because you don't have weight and you're obviously doing a lot of the home WODs and a lot of those kind of exercises that are low weight, high volume, those eat muscle. So what you got to do is make sure that you minimize the amount of muscle you lose during doing a lot of the cardio and the aerobic work by fueling that with, again, carbs and protein. So I'm not really going to go into too much depth about that in terms of percentages and macros and so on, but it's just a ballpark figure if you want to know what to do to keep your muscle: protein, 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 and feed your workouts. So the main reason you guys came, the strategies that you can use to make the most of the weight that you have available to you. The first one is tempo training. So another way is you control the rate of motion. So we do that a lot in CrossFit with the 3 seconds down, 2 second hold, 3 seconds up, 1 second hold, so on and so forth. So in using the tempo for your training, say you don't have a 300-pound barbell, but you got a bag of rice that weighs 20 pounds. You can throw that on your shoulders and do a 5-second squat. Go down 5 seconds, hold 5 seconds, come up 5 seconds, and repeat that for maybe 4 sets of 8. Doing that, one, reinforces your skill of squatting. So if you don't have the right control and the postural understanding of it, being really slow allows you to be mindful of where you're at. Slowing it down also is time under tension, which builds muscle mass by itself. And it's enough stimulus to slow down the rate of strength loss. Tempo, you can use progressively over time. So say your 20 pound sandbag. You're doing 3 second tempos. Next week, you're doing 4 second tempos. The week after that, you're doing 5 second tempos. And you can make a subjective observation of how the longer tempos are getting easier for you. And thereby you can stay on top of your improvement and feel good about the work that you're putting in. The next thing is speed. The faster you move, the more motor units your body needs to recruit. If the weight is too light, then speed has no effect. But a good example of how velocity training affects size is if you look at the difference between a marathon runner and a sprinter. A marathon runner probably weighs $120 soaking wet, and a sprinter is in almost bodybuilder shape. And the reason for that is because they're expressing maximal velocity under the tension of their body weight. So what you can do is you can pick a movement that you want to maintain or work at, put something between 30 to 80% of your max load on there, and try to move it as quickly as possible. Keep the reps fairly low because the speed will degrade over time and it'll turn into an endurance workout, which is what you don't want to do. So max about 8 reps, I would say. And as you're doing it, I would recommend maybe having your camera filming you so that you can keep an eye on the speed of the bar or the speed of the weight. And that way you can stay honest with yourself that you're maintaining that maximum velocity. When you see the speed start to taper off and bleed off, your training is done for velocity training. So that high speed movement recruits as many motor units and muscle fibers as you can, which will help you maintain your strength or even gain. Training volume, that's another way. If you train high volume or you train to failure, let's start with failure first. If you go high volume to failure, as you start approaching failure, the body's going to start recruiting more and more and more muscle units. So again, you're touching on the motor units that you wouldn't normally use in a lightweight workout. The caveat to that would be that you got to make sure there's a moderate amount of weight. So don't go with like a water bottle or 2-pound dumbbells. Just grab something odd around the house that kind of feels like a bit of work, and then there you can work it to failure. If it takes more than 4 sets before you're completely done, then it's probably too light, and you're back into the endurance aspect, and we're not really touching on strength there. The other part of high volume is the conditioning of your ligaments, tendons, and joints. So by going lightweight, but doing a lot of work that very specifically targets those areas, a good example would be dragging a sled for 2 miles or dragging something for 2 miles. It's a lot of work, it's repetitive, but that's what you're doing to strengthen the tendons and ligaments and create joint stability and basically the framework to be able to sustain high weights when you go back to it. By strengthening those things, you're injury proofing your body as well, and maintaining a certain skill level of strength that you can use to compensate for the lack of weight that you have. Spoke about mobility. Spend time really honing in on what it is for you that's holding you back from expressing your strength as best as you can. If you're working on strict press, but you don't have the overhead mobility to get full lockout or get your arms over your shoulders and you're kind of doing the forward press, shoulders are shrugged up, then it really doesn't matter how strong you were before you went into this quarantine. You're basically long-term setting yourself up for injury or failure. So mobility, that's one of your bread and butter fundamentals. If you're not on that, you're missing the boat as far as I'm concerned with strength. And you're not doing yourself any favors by ego lifting because you're not doing it right. So take that time, find out what it is that's holding you back specifically, and be honest with yourself. As far as mobility is concerned in a strength realm, a way I would recommend looking at it is that lack of mobility is lack of position-specific strength. Your body's just not strong enough in that position to maintain it. So you're going to try and get strong in another position. You're kind of shooting yourself in the foot. Get strong where you need to be strong so you can maintain that mobility. Pretty straightforward. I think the magic bullet for training at home is isometrics. This is a way that you can really express maximal force. So for those of you that don't know, isometric is finding an immovable situation and expressing maximal force against it. So an example would be, say on a pull-up, holding yourself at the bar and just holding. That's an isometric hold. Another thing would be like taking a wall and standing against it and maximal contraction against the wall and holding for something between, I would range it if you're working between 5 and 20 seconds, depending what you're after. If you're looking for positional stability or strength expression, right? Also, the beauty of isometrics is it doesn't take a lot of time to train. If you do 9 6-second sets of a particular movement, that's done in no time and you've got a lot of work in. And because you're able to express maximal effort against that immovable object, it allows you to really get all your muscles involved for both strength and size. I have a quick video for you guys that I stole off Instagram. If you DM me, I'll send you the full video, but here goes.
First would be bicep curls. So most people, when they're doing bicep curls, they know, okay, I'm going to hold on to a bar and I'm just going to go through this range of motion. Now, when you're doing isometrics, you're not going through the whole bicep curl range. So let's say for you, you really struggle to get the bar started. And what happens with most people is they go to get the bar started and they use a little bit of hip momentum, speed up, and then they get a little bit more leverage. Their biceps get tight and then they start to be able to pull here. And some people even just do partial ranges and they won't go into that full extension to avoid that weak area. So let's say you have the opportunity to do isometrics with something like this. I want to train this bottom range. So that's the joint angle that I'm going to pick. I'm in this bottom range, I'm doing bicep curls, and then I do my contractions here. The second, well, actually, before I get to the second, let's use a second example of that with joint angles. So that would be for bicep curls. Let's say that I'm trying to use this to develop weightlifting technique because I'm a CrossFitter, I'm a weightlifter, and I want to improve my front squat. And the point of my front squat that is most weak is my bottom position. So this same height that I would use for my bicep curl would basically be my bottom position for a front squat. And then that's where I would do my contractions here. And that would help me.
All right. So, oops. I don't know what just happened. There we go.
First would be bicep curl.
Sorry about that, guys. So that was just a quick video. I got the full length one I can send to any of you if you want to see it. He's also got a an instructional on how to build that little contraption, and it shows how to use it for multiple different techniques, including your Olympic lifting, your powerlifting, and so on. So if you want to see more on that, let me know. So breaking it down again, the training strategies, you can use tempo in your movements, slow it down, focus on your skill. It'll help you build muscle mass. Speed training, the faster you move against the resistance, the more you're going to recruit muscle fibers and the more you're going to be able to sustain that strength. Lots of volume for developing joint stability, movement competence, and ligament and tendon strength. Work on the skill of the movement. The more skillful you are at the particular movement, the more you're going to be able to express strength in that position and in that movement. So again, you're going to maintain strength that way. Mobility allows you to do what you're actually supposed to do in the way that your body wants to express it optimally. So maintain or improve your mobility in exactly the ranges that you want to work on. And finally, bring in isometric training into your training cycle, because the more you keep that in there, the more you can have maximal effort and maximal motor recruitment, and therefore your strength maintains or improves during this period of not actually having full access to a gym. And just to remind you guys, strength is very loyal to you. You put a lot of work into developing your strength. If you got at least a year or more under your belt, there's an element of skill. There's an element of your nervous system being able to recruit the muscles. There's an element of having the myonuclei, the muscle fibers present. So as soon as you go back to regular training, the strength will come back to you really fast. So it's not as dreadful or as dire as you might think it is. It's more of a mental thing. When you haven't picked up a weight in a while and then the barbell feels super heavy, 2-3 training sessions, all it takes for you to get back into the groove, especially if you maintain the competence in the movement. So if I'm practicing clean and jerks with a broomstick and really focusing on my technique, really focusing on performing the timing correctly, when I get back to a barbell, I might be better off than when I left off. And flew through that. Time is short, so I hope that helps a lot of you guys, and thanks. Any questions, just shoot.
Hi, Ben. Can I ask a question?
Jeanette, shoot.
Training at home, would it be better to focus like single compounds or multiple compounds?
For strength?
Yeah.
Well, for you, I'd say pick what's missing. Pick what your area of weakness is, right? If it's a skill thing, that's where compounds come into play, right? If it's, so you're reinforcing the movement with different sections by doing the compound lifts, right?
Okay.
Like, you're talking about complexes, sorry, right?
Either individual compound moves or multiple compounds in one day.
Like individual compound moves or multiple compounds in one day?
So give me an example.
Say overhead press day.
What?
Should we focus on other groups just because we're quarantined and we don't have that like accessibility? Or should
you're going into the realm of your how much volume your body can recover from. So if I'm hitting like say an overhead press, and then I go into a push press, and then maybe I work my split jerk, I could be potentially overtraining that movement pattern depending on how I attack it. So, but if say you're doing like an overhead press and then you're going into a back squat and then maybe finishing it off with I don't know, chin-ups, right? Then you're using different muscle groups and you're still building, and that's fine. So again, that's also determined by your training level. So what your individual maximal recoverable volume from that, from stimulating those muscle groups is.
True. Nice.
Cool. I really liked what you said about training with the broomstick too, because I feel like if you can recruit those muscle groups like without the load, when you have the load, it becomes so much easier.
Absolutely.
So this is like a great time to practice those things.
it's a very overlooked part of strength is the skill of the strength, right? So skill of strength, most people just ignore or take for granted. But if you slow it right down and focus on the movement that you're trying to be strong in, and really improve your level of skill at that, that does wonders for what your 1 rep max will be over time.
Yeah, very true. I find too, like the minor muscles support the major, right? So if they fail, then if your minors are good, then you'll still be okay in some aspect.
Yeah, for sure.
Very cool. Can you please send me that video as well that you put out?
Sure.
Please. Thank you.
I know one of my focuses right now, just due to time, and again, usually, you know, we're so worried about the day-to-day, like you got to push heavy weights and do as much as you can because you don't want to lose any gains. But I'm using this time to work on my movement and the skill. So I've been focusing on personally getting better at squat jerks, right? I know that my push jerks are a huge issue for me. I know that I'm well, really, I don't think I haven't PR'd in, I don't know, maybe 4 years with my clean and jerk. And I obviously had surgery, but even before that, it's always been an issue of mine. And now I'm taking the time to really get good at that movement with all different types of variety. So I'm just kind of letting go with realizing it's not about the weight, because I know once I get back to, like, say I just stopped doing this and tried to go back to lifting as heavy as I can, I'm going to end up going to what I've always been doing and not being able to get better. So I know I've been trying to focus on movement patterns instead of worrying about weight right now. Because again, everyone's in the same boat with their training right now. It's not like everyone's getting huge gains or putting in so many hours. At least I'm not. And I know I'm focusing on that movement quality. And just by that, just because of the situation we're in right now, it's letting me really stick to it, because sometimes you just fall to bad habits. Be like, you know what, let me just go back to heavyweight. And I'm really hoping that this quality is going to translate into a lot of other things with my just squatting alone, overhead mobility and stability and all that stuff. I know a lot of people don't have access to weight, and I think that, you know, not thinking about weight as the only thing that's going to be dependent on increasing our fitness, where we should be thinking about, like, we're at home, we're forced to not lift heavy, so let's try to make sure that our movement quality is better than it's ever been. So this way we're reprogramming, like, our nervous system and our movement patterns. And I'm hoping the people who do that are going to see huge gains come, like, 6 months to a year from now, because they've taken the time to only do good quality movements instead of, you know, going back to their old ways with, like, you know what, forget it. I'm just going to try to push really hard and add extra weight and whatnot, and think, you know, not improve. Because that's always been an issue of mine. I mean well, and then I just go back to where I'm comfortable, right? Because it's an ego thing.
Yeah, totally. I think you're right. It's like one of the biggest hindrances to long-term strength development is just the skill of the movement, the fundamentals, the basics. And most people, when they come in and they get excited about lifting, they push the numbers and they keep watching the numbers, and they don't take the time and put in the prerequisite effort to make sure that the movement is actually what it's supposed to be. And then at a certain point, you hit a plateau, and then you try to do all sorts of training cycles with percentages, and you just get frustrated because the gains aren't coming. And usually that comes down to your inability to perform it well.
Yeah, I agree.
Hi, this is Chris Duguay. I want to thank Chris Cristini for inviting me for this, but exactly what you're saying, I really appreciated this seminar, because I've been telling my clients it's now time to, you know, try not to be creative on how much weight you lift. You know, I've had a few people call me and say, Chris, you know, I ended up hurting myself because I'm trying to tape, let's say, like cans of paint to a bar so that they could get the weight and load. And I'm like, guys, just work on your technique, the skill set of what I've been teaching you, increase your flexibility, implement some maybe power yoga in there, and really, you know, tighten up the ligaments, tendons, so that when we get back, like you said yourself, and I really like that muscle memory is there. And, you know, I had shared a post with myself. I've taken almost 7 years off training just to allow my body to calm down from the 20 years I put my body through. And the muscle memory comes back quick, but the mobility and the skill set, that's what I'm concentrating on now and trying to make sure that I get back. So again, just praising what you said, like it's not always about the weight. It's letting them understand that once you understand the skill set and the movement, weight, everybody will always PR and continue to get better and continue to improve. And that's why I've, enjoyed being in this business for over 20 years, is watching the human body and what it's capable of achieving if it's taught properly. And again, thank you very much for the seminar.
You're welcome, Chris. Absolutely on point. Yeah, 100% agree.
Ben, I have a question. It's Jess Alin. Is there any science behind mass of muscle as it correlates with how much that you can, I guess, lift or whatever, lift and push? So like, great example is, oh yeah, Nydia's here. Nydia is a smaller person and can deadlift probably all of us put together. But she's not like a stereotypical representation of what strength looks like. So is there any information that sort of explains why that's the case, or why that can be the case?
So muscle mass does play a role, and the more muscle mass you have, the more you are able to express your strength. But that in itself is not enough. If you're just training muscle mass and not motor unit recruitment or the movement pattern, then again, you're leaving a lot on the table. So if somebody is smaller and they can express an insane amount of strength, it's probably due to the fact that their skill set is high, their motor unit recruitment level or percentage is very high. And also part of that is mentality. But even people like that can benefit from adding muscle mass because that'll increase their strength.
So it's not necessarily just about, looking bulky and looking jacked.
No, it's not. You can be very muscular, but relatively not strong. But compared to yourself, you would be stronger having muscle mass than not having muscle mass. So because it's a confluence of a lot of factors, everybody can benefit from training all aspects of strength.
So in Nydia's case, sorry Nydia to push you, why is Nydia so strong?
Well,
what's the secret? I mean, there's no secret.
It's exactly what I said. It's motor unit recruitment, it's skill and technique, it's mentality, it's mobility. And also, let's not negate the fact that Nydia is a little person, but it doesn't mean that she doesn't have muscle mass. I'm sure if you did like a body composition thing, she'd be pretty high up on lean mass compared to a lot of people.
Thank you. Sorry, Nydia.
All right, cool. Any other questions, guys? All right. Really
yeah,
good.
I got one more.
All right, shoot.
So I think a lot of people, especially CrossFitters, tend to be more on the busy end in their day-to-day life, and they work out in an hour, and a lot of those times the hour looks like 5x5 back squat, and then maybe some workout, let's say something like Helen with a super amount of a huge amount of intensity in it. The upsides of that are obviously that you feel like you've really done a lot of work, and then it's probably the most efficient way if you're limited to an hour. How would you suggest changing maybe your training times, or how a week would look or a day would look if you now have maybe less equipment but way more time on your hands? Would you change it, or would you try and keep it in that same do 1 hour a day?
I would say keep it to an hour. Keep it to an hour and a half, depending on how much time you have available to you. As far as strength is concerned, in CrossFit, to a point, strength will never be something that you'll regret having. So you could use this time as your off season to develop a strength that you haven't had before we went into quarantine. Use this off season to really slow down a little bit and focus on your weaknesses and come out of it better on the other end. in terms of just always doing the same thing every time, you're kind of shooting yourself in the foot. If you look at long-term periodization of CrossFit athletes, there's strength phases, there's alactic endurance phases, and so on and so forth. So what you want to do is maybe take this time where it's kind of uncertain and say, what are my biggest holds in my game as a CrossFitter? And maybe I'm going to put the majority of my focus on plugging those holes because I have nothing but time available right now.
With your experience, what would you say is a common hole that you see that CrossFitters have and that you think, or you would suggest that they should take the time into developing in times like this?
Okay, so not talking about elite CrossFitters, but the CrossFit population in general, I would say that the majority of them can make the most gains in their CrossFit by taking a little time to focus on strength. Strength is like a low-hanging fruit for most CrossFitters. And to work on that really doesn't take that much more out of their day to really make significant strength gains, which will then carry over to everything in CrossFit. Your gymnastics will get better, your barbell cycling will get better, the only thing that might suffer is your cardio, and you just have to push that back up. With your
There's no specific like movements that you see or body parts that you see that are underdeveloped from CrossFitters with your experience?
Well, like what you specifically, like say upper body pulling.
Well, it could be anything. You know what I mean? Something that you think like when you're training your clients.
Upper body pulling would probably be the biggest across the board weakness for most CrossFitters. For most CrossFitters that are not at an elite competitive level.
Okay, so things like just, I guess, lat pull down, something as simple as
Lat
that,
pull
or
downs,
rope climbs,
pull-ups, bent over rows, you know, a bunch of stuff like that, seated rows.
Okay. So nothing specific could be, it could be horizontal pulling, it could be vertical pulling, doesn't matter.
That's right, yeah. Just overall, just to generalize, is upper body pulling is lacking the most, in my experience, across most CrossFitters.
Cool.
I had a question about squat variations. Did you have, or do you have like a favorite or a preferred squat variation to the back squat? The back squat being the hardest, obviously, to get the weight on your back. Like
So
in terms of like overhead squat or zercher or front, like did you have a preferred one in terms of carryover or strength?
So in this time, because of the limited amount of weights available, I would really like emphasize single leg strength. So reverse lunges, Cossack squats, step ups, Bulgarian split squats, things like that. You can always just throw in a barbell with lightweight or hold a dumbbell or whatever it is, and really focus on developing single length strength and stability and control. And that'll have like the biggest carryover, in my opinion, at this time towards going back to building a heavy back squat.
Hey Ben, what about pistols? Will those translate to your back squat pretty well?
Yeah, to a point, right? Again, if you've got a good competency with your pistols and you're not switching it over to like working on strength endurance, then yeah, for sure. If you can't do a pistol and then you can go move up and do 10, you've made significant progress, right?
So I used to think I had a pretty good back squat until we got into this quarantine situation. I started doing pistols and I noticed I cannot do a single pistol for the life of me. Like my leg cannot handle the body weight. So I've taken it on to practice doing pistols, and I'm just wondering how that will kind of translate back to my back squat.
In terms of like being strong enough to do it, having the mobility to do it, having the joint stability, right? All those things will improve just on you working on your pistol. So I would totally recommend it. And you don't really need to jump right into the pistol. You can do controlled step downs. You can do Cossack squats, the lateral squats, and things like that. That'll gradually help you build up into a pistol squat, which when done correctly will have a lot of carryover into the fundamentals of your squat.
Awesome. I'm glad you mentioned that actually, because I was really struggling to do a pistol. So I relied on the wall or the door to kind of assist me in coming up and down. Even now, I've made some progress, but it's still, the recruitment isn't there, and it's slowly getting better. But I was surprised to see the lack of recruitment and the mobility that came from just a single leg compared to using both.
Perfect. Yeah, and that's also a good example of the skill of squatting, right? So, which will definitely help.
Well, I also think it's fair to share, like, what's your 1 rep max back squat?
Mine not values.
Yeah, yours.
Mine
It's been a while.
Well,
I'd say
go ahead. I'm just saying, because not everyone's going to know, the significance of what you're talking about. You might just be, again, we just see like pretty much your head, like, oh, this guy might squat 100 pounds and he can't do a single leg back squat. That's not the case, right? For some people who don't know you.
Yeah, I'd say lifetime PR would probably be 455-pound back squat at 74.
Yeah, right on. And again, just trying to, emphasize that, say you're only able to squat 400 right now, you know what I mean? Like 405, whatever, say, and that'd be, again, 50 pounds off your PR. And you are having a hard time doing a single leg squat. So we know that I think that's fairly significant, that, the importance, especially if we want to get into fitness, and we understand that all aspects are important. It's not just the number, it's being able to do everything essentially. And hopefully, if you can't do something, but you can do, you can't do a one-legged squat, but you have an incredible back squat, chances are, if you increase that range of motion, and strengthen, or make that joint fitter essentially, because it incorporates a bunch of different things, that hopefully that could be the secret to getting to like 475, right? Because I think that's significant to say, like, what, you can't do a one-legged squat, but you can do something that probably most people on this live call right now cannot do.
Yeah, I was really surprised when I noticed how bad it was. I mean, just to see that, like, that the missing fundamental piece in my back squat wasn't there, and how much that could impact it eventually, giving me that time to focus on it. And we'll see how that impacts once we're free from this.
A good thing with that as well, to add on both your points, is your longevity as an athlete. If you can say squat a ridiculous amount of weight, but the fundamentals are missing, you don't have good mobility, your air squat sucks, and so on and so forth. Over time, you're going to degrade your body. You're going to injure yourself. You're going to have a career that's completely plagued by injury at repeating intervals. And I see it all the time in competitions. Really gifted athletes show up with terrible form, lift a huge amount of weight, and then a couple of years later, you don't see them anymore, because doing it badly takes its toll on your body. And if you're really in fitness for health, then long-term health is important. So by taking care of your fundamentals early on, you're guaranteed to be able to lift heavy weights well into the later years of your life.
Very true.
The other thing I would add is, like, the mindset of that is really, like, what's huge is, I think Ben Bergeron talked about it with Katrin David's daughter, is like how excited she is to find out a weakness. And if you look at it as like, this sucks, like I can't do a pistol, then it's like a negative view. Whereas if you look at it from the other perspective, the way Chris was kind of saying is like, I can back squat 450 pounds and I suck at pistols. Like, how much more room do I have to improve if I get better at pistols? So like, if you take the same thing that like looks like a negative, like, oh, I can't do pistols, and look at it as like, oh man, I found this whole other way to get better, then like it's just like a positive instead of a negative. And looking at it that way just totally changes how you're looking at it, because obviously you're not going to get a whole lot more benefit by doing 5x5 squats, but if you can fix pistols in 3 months, like that could add a huge amount of difference to your overall lifts.
Totally.
Oh yeah, don't get me wrong. I was really excited when I discovered it. I'm like, wow, I can't imagine the impact this will have. I started experimenting with single arm or single leg deadlifts, single arm pull-ups, like single everything. How far this can go. Yeah.
Any more questions from anybody? Any input? Any experiences anyone wants to share? All right.
Wonderful. Cool.
Oh, wait, I had a quick question there, Chris.
Go ahead.
Ben, what's your advice for, you know my situation with my shoulder, right? You know, when I come out of this on the positive end after everything's, you know, managed, what do you do about the imbalances that having, you know, one side of your body shut down? You know, how do you manage that?
So unfortunately, there's no shortcut to that. You have to really take your time to build it up from scratch. And this time around, maybe you have the experience to really work on building it up correctly. It's a long process. In the meantime, you also focus on the other things that you can do. So for example, if it's your shoulder that's injured, you still continue to lift heavy in other ways, like belt squats or back squats or whatever you can adapt, because that heavy lifting has a global effect on your body by the way that it affects your hormonal system and your nervous system. So you can maintain a level of health and strength that way, while at the same time taking the time to correctly build up the use of the injured limb. Really take your time with it and do it right. Because at the end of the day, if you're looking at it long term, what's a year to do it right, then rushing back into it and getting injured repeatedly and wasting 5 years without getting anywhere, you know? There's no easy answers. You just have to put in the work and the consistency.
Makes sense. Anyone else?
All right, guys. Awesome. Well, nice to see you all. I hope you all had a great Easter and stay strong. I expect some PRs at the end of this.
Thank you.
Thanks, PRs.
Bye, Ben.
Bye, guys.
Bye.
Thanks for sharing.
Everyone.
See you, buddy.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, guys.